Sarah Martinez stared at the computer screen in disbelief. The numbers didn't lie, but they told a story that seemed impossible to fix. As the newly appointed project manager for TechFlow Solutions' biggest client, she had inherited what everyone called the disaster project. The previous manager had quit without notice, leaving behind a mess that threatened to sink the entire company. The project was supposed to be simple. Build a custom software system for Henderson Manufacturing, a family-owned business that had been around for 60 years. They needed something to track their inventory, manage orders, and connect their 3 warehouses across the state. The timeline was 6 months, the budget was reasonable, and the requirements seemed straightforward. That was 8 months ago. Now, as Sarah scrolled through endless emails and progress reports, the full scope of the catastrophe became clear. The previous team had completely misunderstood what Henderson Manufacturing needed. Instead of building a simple, user-friendly system, they had created something so complex that even the programmers couldn't explain how it worked. The software crashed every few hours. The database couldn't handle more than 100 orders at a time. The user interface looked like it had been designed by someone who had never used a computer. Worst of all, Henderson Manufacturing was losing thousands of dollars every day because their old system had already been shut down to make room for the new one. Sarah picked up her phone and called her boss, Michael Chun. Michael, I've been looking at the Henderson project files. This is worse than we thought. How much worse? Michael's voice sounded tired. He had been dealing with angry calls from Henderson's CEO all week. The code is completely broken. The team built everything on the wrong framework. It would take months just to figure out what they were trying to do, and even longer to fix it. Sarah rubbed her temples, feeling a headache coming on. Henderson is threatening to sue us, Michael said. They want either a working system by the end of next month, or they want their money back plus damages. We don't have that kind of cash, Sarah. If we lose this contract, we might have to shut down. Sarah had joined TechFlow Solutions because she believed in the company's mission. They specialized in helping small and medium-sized businesses modernize their operations. Unlike the big tech companies that only cared about Fortune 500 clients, TechFlow actually listened to what regular business owners needed. She had spent 5 years at a major corporation, watching talented people work on projects that never saw the light of day. At TechFlow, everything they built actually mattered to real people. The restaurant owners who could finally track their inventory properly. The medical clinics that could schedule patients more efficiently. The small manufacturers who could compete with bigger companies because they had better technology. Now all of that was at risk because of one failed project. Sarah spent the next 3 days buried in technical documentation, trying to understand what had gone wrong. She interviewed the remaining team members, most of whom had worked on the project at different times and had different pieces of the puzzle. Jake Morrison, the lead programmer, had been with the company for 3 years. He was brilliant with code, but terrible at explaining things to non-technical people. When Sarah asked him about the system architecture, he launched into a 20-minute explanation filled with jargon that meant nothing to her. "Jake, stop," she finally said. "Pretend I'm the CEO of Henderson Manufacturing. I don't know what a database schema is. Just tell me why the system doesn't work." Jake looked frustrated. "It's not that simple. The previous manager kept changing the requirements. First they wanted a web-based system, then they wanted a mobile app, then they wanted both. We started building something that could handle everything, but it became too complicated." Lisa Park, the user interface designer, had a different perspective. "The real problem is that nobody ever talked to the actual users. The previous manager just met with Henderson's executives and assumed he understood what the warehouse workers needed. The screens we designed look professional, but they're impossible to use if you're trying to scan barcodes while wearing work gloves." David Kumar, the database specialist, shook his head when Sarah asked him about the performance issues. "We designed the database to handle 1 million records, but Henderson only has about 10,000 products. We over-engineered everything. It's like building a rocket ship when they just needed a bicycle." The more Sarah learned, the clearer it became that the project had failed because nobody had been thinking about the real users. Henderson Manufacturing wasn't some high-tech startup. They made kitchen cabinets and bathroom vanities. Their warehouse workers had been using the same paper-based system for decades. They needed something simple and reliable, not a cutting-edge software platform. Sarah drove out to Henderson's main facility on a cold Thursday morning. The building looked exactly like what she had expected, a large, practical warehouse attached to a small office building. Trucks were parked outside, loading finished cabinets. Workers in safety vests moved around with clipboards, checking items off lists. She met with Tom Henderson, the company's CEO and grandson of the founder. Tom was in his 50s, with calloused hands and work boots that had seen better days. He looked like someone who had spent more time on factory floors than in boardrooms. "I'll be honest with you, Sarah," Tom said as they sat in his cluttered office. "I'm ready to cancel this whole thing and go back to our old system. At least that worked, even if it was slow. Can you show me how your people actually work?" Sarah asked. "I want to understand what they need." Tom looked surprised. "You want to see the warehouse?" Nobody from your company has ever asked that before. They spent 2 hours walking through the facility. Sarah watched workers scan items, check inventory levels, and process orders. She saw how they dealt with damaged products, rush orders, and shipping delays. She talked to Maria Santos, the warehouse supervisor, who had been with the company for 15 years. "The old system wasn't fancy, but it made sense," Maria explained. "I could train a new worker in a few hours. With this new software, even our best people can't figure out how to enter a simple order. Yesterday, it took me 20 minutes just to look up whether we had a specific cabinet door in stock." Sarah realized that the previous team had treated Henderson Manufacturing like they were building software for Google or Amazon. They had created a system designed for tech-savvy users who would spend hours learning complex features. But Henderson's workers needed something as simple and reliable as the paper forms they had been using for decades. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment with a notebook and pen. She ignored her laptop and all the technical documentation. Instead, she drew simple sketches of what a warehouse management system should look like from a worker's perspective. The main screen should show today's orders, clearly organized by priority. Workers should be able to scan a barcode and immediately see where an item was located, how many were in stock, and whether any were already allocated to other orders. If something was out of stock, the system should automatically suggest alternatives or show when new inventory was expected. Everything should be designed for people wearing work gloves, using handheld scanners in a noisy warehouse. Big buttons, clear fonts, and simple workflows. No drop-down menus with 50 options. No screens that required scrolling through multiple pages of information. As Sarah sketched, she began to see a path forward. The current system couldn't be saved, but maybe they didn't need to start completely from scratch. Some of the database work could be salvaged. Some of the code modules could be simplified and repurposed. More importantly, she realized that they had been approaching the problem backwards. Instead of trying to build the most advanced system possible, they needed to build the simplest system that would actually solve Henderson's problems. Sarah called Michael at home, even though it was past 10 o'clock. "I think I know how to fix this," she said. "But it's going to require throwing away most of the work we've already done." "Sarah, we don't have time to start over. Henderson wants a working system in 4 weeks. What if I told you we could build something that actually works in 3 weeks?" There was a long pause. "I'd say you're either crazy or a genius." "Which one is it?" "Maybe both," Sarah said. "But I'm going to need you to trust me. And I'm going to need the whole team to work differently than they ever have before." The next morning, Sarah called an emergency meeting with Jake, Lisa, and David. She had prepared a presentation, but she decided to skip it. Instead, she put her notebook sketches on the table. "We're going to build a completely new system," she announced. "But we're not going to build it the way we usually do." Jake looked skeptical. "Sarah, we have less than a month. It takes longer than that just to plan a project this size." "That's because we always overplan and overthink everything. This time, we're going to build exactly what the users need, nothing more and nothing less." She showed them her sketches. "The whole system has to work on screens this simple. If it takes more than 3 clicks to do something, we're making it too complicated." Lisa studied the drawings. "These look like smartphone apps. Really basic smartphone apps." "Exactly. Henderson's workers already know how to use smartphones. They don't need to learn a completely new way of thinking about technology." David frowned. "But what about all the advanced features? What if they need detailed reports or integration with accounting systems or forecasting tools?" Then, we'll build those later, after we get the basic system working. Right now, Henderson can't even enter an order without the system crashing. Let's solve that problem first. Sarah could see that her team was nervous about the idea. They were used to building comprehensive solutions that tried to anticipate every possible need. The idea of deliberately building something simple felt like giving up. I need you to trust me on this, Sarah said. I've seen what happens when we try to build everything at once. We end up with systems that don't work for anyone. This time, we're going to build something that works perfectly for Henderson's actual needs. Jake raised his hand like he was in school. What about the code we've already written? Do we just throw it all away? We keep anything that can be simplified. We throw away anything that makes the system more complicated than it needs to be. Over the next week, Sarah worked with her team to create what they called the three-screen system. The first screen showed today's work, orders to pick, items to receive, and urgent issues that needed attention. The second screen was for looking up specific products or orders. The third screen was for reporting problems or requesting help. That was it. 3 screens, big buttons, simple workflows. They built a working prototype in 5 days. It wasn't pretty, and it didn't have many features, but workers could scan a barcode and immediately see what they needed to know. They could enter new orders in less than a minute. The system could handle all of Henderson's current inventory without slowing down. Sarah drove back to Henderson Manufacturing with a tablet containing the prototype. She found Maria Santos in the warehouse and asked if she could test it. Maria looked at the simple interface and nodded approvingly. This looks like something I could actually use. She scanned a barcode with the tablet. The item information appeared instantly, showing the location, quantity, and related orders. Maria smiled. How do I mark this as picked? Sarah showed her the single button labeled Picked. Maria tapped it, and the item disappeared from her task list. That's it, Maria asked. That's all I have to do? That's all you have to do. Maria spent 20 minutes testing different functions. She looked up products, entered a new order, and reported a damaged item. Everything worked exactly as she expected. This is what we needed 8 months ago, she said. Why did it take so long to build something this simple? Sarah didn't have a good answer for that question. She was beginning to realize that her industry had a serious problem with making things more complicated than they needed to be. When she got back to the office, Sarah called Tom Henderson and asked for a meeting. She brought the tablet with her and demonstrated the prototype in his office. Tom tried entering an order for 10 kitchen cabinets. The system guided him through each step clearly, showing him available products, suggesting alternatives for out-of-stock items, and calculating delivery dates automatically. The whole process took less than 3 minutes. This actually makes sense, Tom said. It works like I think, not like some computer programmer thinks. We can have the full system ready in 2 weeks, Sarah told him. It won't have every possible feature, but it will handle all your day-to-day operations. We can add more capabilities later if you need them. Tom leaned back in his chair. You know, I was ready to fire your company. The previous manager kept promising me that the complicated system would be worth the wait. He said we needed all those advanced features to stay competitive. What do you think now? Sarah asked. I think I don't need a system that can run NASA. I need a system that can help Maria track cabinet doors. Sarah left Henderson Manufacturing with a signed agreement to proceed with the simplified system. The company would get a working solution in 2 weeks, with additional features to be added over the following months. But as she drove back to the office, Sarah realized that her biggest challenge wasn't technical. She had to convince her own team that simple could be better than complex. In an industry that rewarded people for building impressive, feature-rich systems, she was asking her programmers to build something that looked almost embarrassingly basic. The real test would come when they had to deliver on her promise. 2 weeks to build, test, and deploy a complete warehouse management system. It had never been done that fast at TechFlow Solutions. Sarah parked outside the office and took a deep breath. Tomorrow morning, she would find out if her team was ready to work in a completely new way. Everything depended on whether they could resist the urge to make things complicated. The fate of the company hung in the balance, and Sarah had just bet everything on the radical idea that sometimes the best solution is the simplest one. Sarah arrived at the office at 6 in the morning, 2 hours before anyone else. She needed time to think through exactly how they were going to pull off what seemed impossible. Building a working software system in 2 weeks wasn't just ambitious. It went against everything she had learned about proper development practices. She made coffee and spread out her notes on the conference room table. The prototype had worked, but prototypes always worked. The real challenge was building something robust enough to handle Henderson Manufacturing's daily operations without breaking down. Jake Morrison walked in at 7:30, looking surprised to see Sarah already there. "You know we don't officially start until 9, right? We're not going to have normal hours for the next 2 weeks," Sarah said. "But before we start killing ourselves, I need to know that you're really committed to this approach. No secretly adding extra features because you think they'll be useful. No building things the proper way because that's how you've always done it." Jake poured himself coffee and sat down. "I've been thinking about what you said yesterday, about building exactly what the users need and nothing more. It goes against everything I was taught in computer science school." "What were you taught?" "That good software anticipates future needs. That you should build flexible systems that can handle unexpected requirements. That users don't always know what they want. So you need to give them options they haven't thought of yet." Sarah nodded. "And how did that work out for the Henderson project?" Jake laughed, but it wasn't a happy sound. "We built a system so flexible that nobody could use it. We anticipated so many future needs that we couldn't handle the present needs." Lisa Park arrived a few minutes later, followed by David Kumar. Sarah had asked all of them to come in early so they could plan their approach before the normal workday distractions began. "I've been looking at the existing code," David said, opening his laptop. "About 30% of it can be simplified and reused. The database structure is actually solid. We just need to strip out all the unnecessary complexity." "What about the user interface?" Sarah asked Lisa. "The wireframes you drew are perfect for what Henderson needs. I can have the basic screens designed by tomorrow, but..." Lisa hesitated. "But what?" "They're going to look really simple compared to what we usually deliver. Like, embarrassingly simple. Are you sure the client won't think we're giving them something cheap?" This was exactly what Sarah had been worried about. Her team was used to building impressive-looking systems that demonstrated technical sophistication. The idea of delivering something that looked basic made them uncomfortable, even if it worked better. "Listen," Sarah said, "I want you all to think about the best app on your phone. Not the most feature-rich app, but the one that works exactly like you expect it to. The one you never have to think about because it just does what you need." Jake thought for a moment. "Probably the weather app. I open it. It shows me today's weather and the next few days. That's it, right? It doesn't try to be a meteorology textbook. It doesn't have a million options for different types of forecasts. It just gives you the information you need, clearly and quickly." "But weather apps are simple because weather information is simple," Lisa pointed out. "Warehouse management is more complicated." "Is it really?" Sarah pulled up her sketches again. "What does Maria Santos need to know when she's picking orders?" "She needs to know what items to find, where they're located, and how many to take." "What does she need to know when she's receiving new inventory?" "She needs to know what's expected and where to put it." "What does she need to know when there's a problem?" "She needs to know who to contact and how to report it." David was taking notes. "So we're building 3 separate workflows instead of one complicated system." "Exactly. Instead of a Swiss Army knife that does everything poorly, we're building 3 simple tools that each do one thing perfectly." Sarah assigned specific responsibilities to each team member. Jake would focus on the core functionality, scanning barcodes, looking up products, and updating inventory levels. Lisa would design the user interface for people wearing work gloves on warehouse floors. David would optimize the database to handle Henderson's specific data quickly and reliably. "We're going to work differently than we usually do," Sarah announced. "Instead of planning everything in advance, we're going to build small pieces and test them immediately. If something doesn't work the way users expect, we'll change it right away instead of waiting until the end of the project." This was another departure from standard practice. Most software companies spent weeks creating detailed specifications before writing any code. Changes during development were seen as expensive mistakes that should be avoided. But Sarah had realized that the traditional approach assumed they already understood what users needed. Since they clearly didn't understand Henderson's needs, they would have to learn by building and testing. "How are we going to test things without disrupting Henderson's operations?" Jake asked. "I talked to Tom Henderson yesterday evening. He's going to give us access to their test warehouse, a smaller facility they use for training new workers. We can test our system there with real data and real users, but without affecting their main operations. The first day was chaos. Jake worked on converting the existing database code into something simpler. Lisa designed screen layouts on paper before touching the computer. David tried to figure out which parts of the old system could be salvaged. By the end of the day, they had something that barely qualified as software. Users could scan barcodes and see product information, but nothing else worked. The screens looked like they had been designed by someone who had never seen a computer. The database could handle about 10 products before slowing down. But it was something. And, unlike the previous system, what they had built actually worked, even if it didn't do much. Sarah drove to Henderson's test facility that evening with a tablet containing their one-day prototype. Maria Santos had agreed to stay late to help with testing, despite already working a full shift. "This is what we have so far," Sarah said, showing Maria the barcode scanning function. "It's not much, but I want to make sure we're building it the right way." Maria scanned a few items and nodded approvingly. "The information shows up fast, and I can read it without squinting. That's already better than what you showed us before. What else do you need to see when you scan something?" Maria thought about it. "Is it allocated to an order that's shipping today? Is it the right size and color that the customer ordered? If we're running low, how much time do I have before we run out?" Sarah took notes. These were exactly the kinds of details that never appeared in executive requirements documents, but they were critical for people doing the actual work. Over the next week, Sarah and her team fell into a rhythm. They would work on the system all day, then test it with real users in the evening. Every night, they learned something that changed how they thought about the problem. On Tuesday, they discovered that warehouse workers needed to see information differently depending on whether they were picking orders, receiving shipments, or doing inventory counts. The same product information had to be displayed in 3 different ways. On Wednesday, they realized that the system needed to handle damaged goods, returns, and special orders, situations that hadn't been mentioned in the original requirements but happened every day. On Thursday, they learned that warehouse workers often needed to work offline when their wireless connection was unreliable. The system had to store data locally and sync with the central database when possible. Each discovery required changes to their code, but because they were building simple functions instead of complex systems, the changes were relatively easy to make. Instead of rewriting thousands of lines of code, they could modify a few dozen lines and test the results immediately. Jake was amazed by how fast they could work when they weren't trying to build everything at once. "I've never seen a project move this quickly," he told Sarah on Friday afternoon. "Usually we spend weeks arguing about technical specifications. This week, whenever we had a question, we just built something and tested it." By the end of the first week, they had a system that handled the 3 most common warehouse tasks: picking orders, receiving inventory, and looking up products. It wasn't complete, but workers at Henderson's test facility were already using it for real work. Sarah met with Tom Henderson that weekend to show him their progress. He brought his warehouse manager, Carlos Rivera, who had 30 years of experience in logistics. Carlos tested the system for an hour, running through typical daily scenarios. He picked orders, received a simulated shipment, and looked up products that weren't in stock. "This is good," he said finally. "Really good. It works like I think, and it doesn't try to be too clever." Tom looked relieved. "So you think your people could learn to use this?" "I think they could learn to use this in one afternoon. The old system we've been struggling with? That would take weeks of training, and even then, half my people would be afraid to touch it." Sarah felt a surge of confidence. They were actually on the right track. But she also knew that the second week would be harder than the first. They had to add more features while keeping the system just as simple and reliable. The challenge wasn't just technical. Sarah had to keep her team focused on simplicity when their instincts told them to add more functionality. Every day, someone suggested a feature that seemed like a good idea but would make the system more complicated. "What if we added a dashboard showing today's performance metrics?" Lisa suggested on Monday morning. "Who would use that dashboard?" Sarah asked. The warehouse manager? Does Carlos Rivera have time to look at dashboards while he's managing a warehouse?" Lisa thought about it. Probably not during the day. Maybe at the end of his shift. Then, let's build the core system first and add reporting features later if he actually needs them. This conversation happened dozens of times throughout the second week. The team had good ideas for useful features, but Sarah had to constantly remind them that their job was to solve Henderson's immediate problems, not to build the ultimate warehouse management system. By Wednesday of the second week, they had added functionality for handling returns, managing special orders, and generating the basic reports that Henderson needed for their existing business processes. The system could handle everything that Henderson's workers did on a typical day, but Sarah realized they had a different kind of problem. The system worked well, but it looked almost too simple. Tom Henderson was paying for a custom software solution, and what they were delivering looked like it could have been built by a high school student. Are we making a mistake? Lisa asked during their Thursday morning meeting. This doesn't look like a professional enterprise system. David agreed. The database can handle a lot more complexity than we're using. We could add advanced analytics, predictive inventory management, integration with other business systems. And then we'd be back where we started, Sarah said firmly. Building features that sound impressive but don't actually help Henderson's people do their jobs. Jake had been quiet during the discussion, but now he spoke up. I've been thinking about this all week. You know what the difference is between this project and every other project I've worked on? What? This is the first time I've built software for people I've actually met. Usually, I'm building features for some theoretical user that someone described in a requirements document. This time, I know exactly who's going to use what I'm building, and I know what they need it to do. Sarah realized that Jake had identified the core problem with how most software was developed. Teams built systems for imaginary users with unlimited time to learn complex interfaces. But real users had real jobs to do, and they needed tools that helped them work faster and more accurately. On Friday afternoon, exactly 2 weeks after Sarah had promised Tom Henderson a working system, they drove to Henderson Manufacturing with a production-ready solution. The team was nervous. 2 weeks wasn't enough time to test everything that could go wrong. But it was enough time to build something that solved the problems Henderson needed solved. Tom Henderson, Carlos Rivera, and Maria Santos gathered in the warehouse office for the demonstration. Sarah connected their tablets to Henderson's actual product database and walked them through the complete system. They entered real orders, scanned actual products, and processed genuine inventory updates. Everything worked exactly as expected. The system was fast, reliable, and intuitive. Maria picked up one of the tablets and started using it without any instruction. Within 5 minutes, she was scanning products, updating locations, and marking orders as complete. How long would it take to train our other workers? Carlos asked. About the same time it just took Maria, Sarah said. Maybe an hour if someone has never used a tablet before. Tom Henderson shook his head in amazement. 8 months ago, your previous manager told me we needed 6 months of training to use the system they were building. And that was after 6 months of development. What's different about this system? Carlos wanted to know. Sarah thought about how to explain it. We built it for your workers instead of building it for ourselves. Every decision we made was based on making their jobs easier, not on demonstrating how sophisticated our technology could be. They spent another hour testing edge cases and unusual scenarios. The system handled everything Henderson could throw at it. More importantly, when something unexpected happened, the system failed gracefully instead of crashing completely. As they prepared to leave, Tom Henderson pulled Sarah aside. I want you to know that you saved our relationship with TechFlow Solutions. If this hadn't worked, we would have sued your company and probably forced you out of business. I'm glad we could make it work, Sarah said. But I'm curious about something. Why didn't the previous team build it this way from the beginning? It seems so obvious now. Sarah had been thinking about the same question for 2 weeks. I think it's because we're trained to build impressive systems, not useful systems. We measure success by how many features we can cram in, not by how well the system solves real problems. Well, this system solves real problems. My people can use it, it makes their jobs easier, and it doesn't get in their way. That's all we ever wanted. As Sarah drove back to the office with her team, she realized that they had accomplished something more significant than just saving a client relationship. They had proven that software could be built differently. Instead of starting with technology and trying to find uses for it, they had started with user needs and built the simplest technology that could meet those needs. But she also knew that the real test was still coming. Getting a system to work for 2 weeks in a controlled environment was different from getting it to work for months in the chaos of daily business operations. The next phase would determine whether their simple approach could scale to handle Henderson Manufacturing's complete operations, and whether other clients would accept the idea that simpler could be better than more complex. 3 months after implementing the new system at Henderson Manufacturing, Sarah received a phone call that changed everything. Tom Henderson's voice was excited as he spoke. "Sarah, you need to come see this. We've got numbers that I didn't think were possible." Sarah drove to Henderson Manufacturing the next morning, curious about what Tom wanted to show her. She found him in his office with spreadsheets covering his desk and a huge grin on his face. "Look at these productivity numbers," Tom said, pointing to a chart. "Since we started using your system, our order processing time has dropped by 60%. Inventory accuracy has improved from 78% to 96%. And our workers are actually happy about using technology for the first time in the company's history." The numbers were impressive, but Sarah was more interested in the human impact. "What do your people think about the system now that they've been using it for a while?" "Let me show you," Tom said. They walked to the main warehouse where Maria Santos was training 2 new employees on the system. "This is how you mark an item as picked," Maria was saying, demonstrating with a tablet. "Just scan the barcode and tap the green button. The system automatically updates the inventory and tells you what to pick next." One of the new workers, a young man named Alex, looked confused. "What if I make a mistake?" "Just scan the barcode again and tap the red button to undo it," Maria said. "The system keeps track of everything, so you can't really mess things up permanently." Sarah was struck by how confident and relaxed Maria seemed while teaching the system. When they had first implemented it, Maria had been nervous about using any kind of computer technology. Now she was the company's expert trainer. After the training session, Sarah talked with some of the warehouse workers about their experience. The feedback was overwhelmingly positive, but for reasons she hadn't expected. "The best thing about this system is that it doesn't try to think for me," said Roberto Cruz, a worker with 15 years of experience. "It gives me the information I need, and then gets out of my way so I can do my job." "I've used other warehouse systems at previous jobs," added Jenny Kim, who had started at Henderson just after the new system was implemented. "Those systems had so many features that I spent more time fighting with the computer than actually working. This one just works." But Sarah also learned about problems that hadn't shown up during their 2-week development cycle. The system occasionally had trouble with damaged barcodes. Workers needed a way to handle special customer requests that didn't fit into standard categories. The reporting features needed to be more flexible for busy periods like the holiday season. "The difference is that these are real problems with real solutions," Tom Henderson explained as they walked back to his office. "When something doesn't work quite right, we can describe exactly what we need, and your team can fix it quickly. With the old system, we couldn't even explain what was wrong because we didn't understand how it was supposed to work." Over the following months, Sarah and her team made regular improvements to Henderson's system. But instead of adding complex new features, they focused on making the existing functions work more smoothly. They improved the barcode scanning to handle damaged labels. They added simple ways to handle special orders. They created reports that gave managers the information they needed without overwhelming them with data. Each improvement was small and focused. Instead of major system updates that required retraining, workers barely noticed when new capabilities were added because they fit naturally into the workflows they already knew. Word about Henderson Manufacturing's success began to spread in the local business community. At a regional manufacturing association meeting, Tom Henderson gave a presentation about how the new warehouse system had transformed their operations. "The key insight," Tom told the audience, "was that we didn't need the most advanced system possible. We needed a system that our people could actually use to get their work done better and faster." After Tom's presentation, Sarah was approached by several business owners who were struggling with their own technology problems. Most of them had similar stories. They had invested in sophisticated software systems that looked impressive but were too complicated for their employees to use effectively. Michael Chun, Sarah's boss at TechFlow Solutions, was initially skeptical when she proposed changing how their company approached software development. Our clients expect comprehensive solutions, he said. If we start delivering simple systems, they might think we're not giving them their money's worth. But what if simple systems actually give them more value? Sarah asked. Henderson Manufacturing is saving thousands of dollars a month because their workers are more productive. They're making fewer errors because the system is easier to use correctly. Isn't that worth more than a system with features they can't use? To prove her point, Sarah proposed an experiment. TechFlow Solutions would offer two types of projects: traditional comprehensive systems and simple solution systems. Clients could choose which approach they preferred, and they would track the results. The first client to choose the simple solution approach was Riverside Medical Clinic, a family practice that needed a patient scheduling system. Their existing system was so complicated that they had hired a full-time staff member just to manage appointments. Dr. Patricia Wong, the clinic's owner, was frustrated with how technology was affecting her practice. We got into medicine to help patients, not to manage computer systems, she told Sarah. But we spend so much time fighting with our software that we have less time for actual patient care. Sarah applied the same approach she had used with Henderson Manufacturing. Instead of trying to build a comprehensive medical practice management system, her team focused on solving one specific problem, making it easy to schedule appointments, confirm them, and handle changes. They spent time in the clinic, watching how the staff actually worked. They learned that most appointment scheduling problems came from poor communication between the front desk, the medical assistants, and the doctors. The existing system had dozens of features for managing patient records, billing, and reporting, but it made simple communication difficult. The system Sarah's team built looked almost ridiculously simple compared to typical medical software. It had three main functions: schedule appointments, send reminders, and track availability. But it integrated smoothly with the clinic's existing systems and could be learned by new staff in less than an hour. 6 months after implementation, Dr. Wong reported that appointment scheduling errors had dropped by 90%, patient satisfaction scores had increased significantly, and they had been able to reassign their full-time scheduling coordinator to clinical duties. The previous system was like driving a space shuttle to go to the grocery store, Dr. Wong explained. This system is like driving a reliable car that gets you where you need to go without any drama. Word of these successes began attracting attention from larger companies. Sarah was invited to speak at software development conferences about what she called user-first design. The core principle was simple: start with what users actually need to accomplish, then build the simplest technology that can help them accomplish it. This approach challenged fundamental assumptions in the software industry. Most developers were trained to build flexible systems that could handle many different use cases. They measured success by the number of features they could deliver. The idea of deliberately building limited systems felt wrong to many experienced programmers. But Sarah had data to support her approach. Projects built with user-first design were completed faster, had fewer bugs, and achieved higher user satisfaction than traditional projects. More importantly, clients actually used the systems they built instead of working around them. The breakthrough moment came when TechFlow Solutions was invited to bid on a project for Metro City's Public Works Department. They needed a system to track maintenance requests, schedule repairs, and manage their vehicle fleet. The project had a 6-month timeline and a budget of $200,000. Sarah's team competed against 3 larger companies, each proposing comprehensive enterprise solutions with hundreds of features. Sarah proposed something different: a simple system that would handle the 3 most common tasks that public works employees dealt with every day. During the client presentation, the other companies showed impressive demonstrations of their full-featured systems. They had dashboards with real-time analytics, mobile apps with dozens of functions, and integration capabilities with every major government software platform. When Sarah's turn came, she showed a basic tablet interface that allowed workers to report problems, look up maintenance schedules, and request supplies. The demonstration took 5 minutes because there wasn't much to show. "That's it?" asked the department director, looking confused. "Where are all the advanced features?" "We didn't build advanced features," Sarah explained. "We built exactly what your workers told us they needed to do their jobs more efficiently. But what if we need more capabilities in the future? Then we'll build those capabilities when you actually need them, based on how you're actually using the system. Right now, your main problem is that maintenance requests get lost in paperwork, and workers can't easily find information about previous repairs. Our system solves those problems immediately. Sarah's team won the contract, but not because of their demonstration. They won because they had spent time with actual public works employees, learning about their daily challenges. While the other companies had proposed solutions based on what they thought government agencies should need, Sarah had proposed a solution based on what Metro City's workers actually needed. The Metro City project became a showcase for the user-first design approach. The system was implemented in 3 weeks instead of 6 months. Training took 2 days instead of 2 months. Workers began using the system immediately instead of finding ways to avoid it. More importantly, the simple system revealed problems that hadn't been visible before. When maintenance requests were tracked efficiently, the department discovered that they were getting twice as many requests as they had realized. When repair schedules were easy to access, workers found that many problems could be prevented with better preventive maintenance. The fancy systems we looked at would have hidden these insights under layers of complicated features, the department director told Sarah. Your simple system made our real problems visible so we could actually solve them. Within a year, Sarah's user-first design methodology had become TechFlow Solutions' primary approach. The company had transformed from a typical software development firm into something unique, a company that specialized in making technology simpler instead of more complex. This transformation wasn't without challenges. Some clients initially resisted the idea of paying for simple systems. Some developers struggled to break old habits of building comprehensive solutions. Some projects required more complex approaches that couldn't be simplified. But the results spoke for themselves. Client satisfaction scores increased dramatically. Projects were completed faster and with fewer budget overruns. Most importantly, the systems TechFlow built were actually used by the people they were designed to help. Sarah received a phone call from Tom Henderson on the 1-year anniversary of implementing their warehouse system. "I wanted to give you an update on how things are going," he said. "Any problems with the system?" "That's just it. There haven't been any major problems. The system just works, day after day. My workers don't even think about it anymore. It's become like electricity or running water. They expect it to be there when they need it, and it always is." "That's exactly what we hoped for," Sarah said. "But here's the thing I didn't expect," Tom continued. "Because our warehouse operations run so smoothly now, we've been able to focus on other parts of our business. We've improved our manufacturing processes, developed new products, and increased sales by 30% this year." Sarah realized that this was the real value of simple technology. When systems worked invisibly in the background, people could focus on the work that actually mattered to their organizations. Technology became a tool that enabled human creativity instead of an obstacle that consumed human energy. The user-first design approach began attracting attention beyond TechFlow Solutions. Other software companies started adopting similar methodologies. Business schools began teaching courses on simplicity-focused development. Industry publications wrote articles about the simple software movement. Sarah was invited to give a keynote presentation at the National Software Development Conference, the industry's largest annual event. Standing in front of 3,000 developers, she tried to explain what they had learned. "We used to think that good software demonstrated how smart we were as programmers," she said. "We measured success by the complexity of problems we could solve and the sophistication of features we could build. But we had it backwards. Good software demonstrates how well we understand the people who use it. The most successful systems we've built are the ones that disappear into the background, allowing users to focus on their actual work." The question isn't whether we can build complex systems. Of course we can. The question is whether we should. In most cases, the answer is no. During the question and answer session, a developer from a large tech company stood up. "But doesn't this approach limit innovation? If we only build what users ask for, how do we create breakthrough technologies that change how people work?" Sarah had been expecting this question. Innovation doesn't come from adding more features. Innovation comes from understanding problems so deeply that you can solve them in ways people never imagined possible. Our most innovative project was also our simplest. We built a warehouse management system with 3 screens that replaced a system with dozens of screens. The innovation wasn't in the technology. It was an understanding that warehouse workers needed focus, not features. After her presentation, Sarah was approached by representatives from major corporations, government agencies, and nonprofit organizations. Everyone seemed to have the same story. They had invested heavily in sophisticated technology that their people couldn't or wouldn't use effectively. But Sarah also realized that changing the software industry would require more than just proving that simple systems could work. It would require training developers to think differently about their role. Instead of being technology creators, they needed to become problem solvers. Instead of building impressive systems, they needed to build invisible systems. TechFlow Solutions began offering workshops for other software companies on user-first design principles. Sarah developed a training curriculum that taught developers how to observe users, identify core needs, and resist the temptation to over-engineer solutions. The workshops were popular, but changing established practices proved difficult. Many developers had spent years building their expertise around complex technologies. The idea of deliberately building simple solutions felt like a step backward in their careers. Sarah understood this concern because she had felt it herself. It's actually harder to build simple systems than complex ones, she would tell skeptical developers. Complex systems can hide design flaws under layers of features. Simple systems expose every decision you make. You have to understand user needs perfectly because you can't fix poor understanding with additional functionality. 3 years after the Henderson manufacturing project, Sarah received an unexpected phone call. A reporter from Business Technology magazine wanted to write a feature story about the simplicity movement in software development. We're tracking companies that have adopted user-first design principles, the reporter explained. The preliminary data suggests that these companies are achieving significantly better outcomes than traditional development approaches. The reporter had interviewed clients from dozens of simple software projects. The pattern was consistent: faster implementation, higher user adoption, lower maintenance costs, and better business results. What we're seeing challenges basic assumptions about software development, the reporter said. The most successful systems are often the ones with the fewest features. Sarah agreed to be interviewed for the article, but she insisted on one condition. The focus had to be on the users who benefited from simple systems, not on the developers who built them. The resulting article featured Maria Santos, the warehouse supervisor who had become Henderson Manufacturing's technology trainer. It profiled Dr. Patricia Wong, whose clinic had improved patient care by simplifying appointment scheduling. It highlighted Metro City workers who could now focus on maintaining infrastructure instead of fighting with software. The real story isn't about technology, Sarah told the reporter. It's about giving people tools that help them do meaningful work more effectively. The article was published with the headline, "The Simple Revolution: How Less Became More in Software Development." It sparked conversations throughout the technology industry about the relationship between complexity and value. But, for Sarah, the most meaningful feedback came from an unexpected source. She received a handwritten letter from Roberto Cruz, the Henderson manufacturing worker she had interviewed years earlier. "Dear Ms. Martinez," the letter read, "I wanted to thank you for building software that treats us like people instead of like computers. Before your system, I felt stupid because I couldn't figure out how to use the technology at work. Now I feel confident because the technology works the way I think. You gave me back my pride in doing good work." Reading that letter, Sarah realized that they had accomplished something more important than just building better software. They had proven that technology could enhance human dignity instead of undermining it. They had shown that the best systems were the ones that made people feel more capable, not less capable. The Simple Revolution was really about respecting the people who use technology. It was about understanding that workers like Roberto Cruz weren't failures when they couldn't use overly complex systems. The systems were failures for not meeting workers' needs. As Sarah reflected on the journey from that first disastrous Henderson project to the industry-wide changes that had followed, she realized that the most important lesson had been the simplest one. Technology should serve people, not the other way around. The transformation of TechFlow Solutions from a typical software company into a leader in user-first design had proved that even established industries could change when someone was willing to challenge fundamental assumptions about how work should be done. But the real measure of success wasn't in industry recognition or business growth. It was in the knowledge that thousands of workers like Maria Santos, Dr. Wong, and Roberto Cruz could now do their jobs more effectively because someone had finally built technology that understood what they actually needed. The mission Sarah had started, building software that worked for real people in real situations, had become bigger than any single company or project. It had become a new way of thinking about the relationship between humans and technology, one simple solution at a time.